Hey there. So I'm going to go through a couple of assignments that I've given to my students online, and I'm going to go through how to make them more accessible. So this accessibility checker over here, I'm going to do it for Google Slides and Google Docs. So this accessibility checker over here, I just Googled accessibility for Google Slides, and this was just a free download. Since Google Slides does not have the outline function like PowerPoint does. Um, I don't know how useful this is because it kind of is acting like I have a lot of um, accessibility already in check, which I found I don't necessarily have all of everything written as well, set up as well as it could have been. It does say that I have a frowny face next to images have alt text. That's because none of my images do, which I found out I really need to fix for the next time when I make one of these presentations in the future. Or if I utilize this again, I can update it. So, I can start off with the importance of alt text. So this project is called Upcycle It, and it was the final project for my students to do for their science and social studies final. So they had to find recycled materials and turn it into something new or upcycle it. So I had this really fun page filled with all of these different pictures of examples of upcycled projects with no alt text. So there's no explanation if students are visually impaired and are unable to see this very well. So it's really important to add that in the future. As mentioned in the online accessibility handbook, if you use an already made up theme in PowerPoint or in Google Slides, it is easier to follow along when there's a screen reader on. So for this one, I actually did use a theme that was already made up, so that's good. Normally I just make my own. For this one, I didn't, so I did use a theme. However, I did modify it at certain points. So like here, I ended up adding a second heading. And then I found on this slide, so this is slide 4, and on slide 5, when I went through to find my reading order, I did find that it was not the correct order. So it went from directions to the directions, and then it went to this portion before reading that heading because I did not add any styles to this. It's all just normal text, so I did not add any headings. So that absolutely would have helped with the reading order. So that was for slides 4 and 5. The same thing happened. It says items you could use with a bunch of items you could use, and then it goes into the list of objects you can make before it said the heading objects you could make. So adding those headings would certainly help the reading order. I did bullet the lists, which using the bullet option, so that is beneficial because it would read it in order. Down here on slide 7, I added a link, gave some nice directions, click the link and watch the video. However, then I just inserted the URL, which, now with it being brought to my attention that this should just be the text of what they're clicking on, it makes a lot more sense. I do that sometimes. I'm not sure why I didn't do it for this one, but in the future, I would definitely change this to the actual text of what they're clicking on. I also want to make sure that they have closed captionings in this video. So if they didn't have it, I would make sure to, if they did have the option, I would make sure to explain to my students how they could find that option. If they didn't have it, I could find a way for it to be transcribed. The color contrast I think is pretty good. Not a ton of colors, so I think the color contrast is pretty decent on here. I know that it did mention that you shouldn't use color alone to set apart certain parts of the slide or important information. Although I did use color here and on certain things, I don't think the color necessarily added to the meaning more than anything else. The one thing I could do, so like for slide 2 down here, where I just add little comments like this is your chance to become an engineer, and this is your chance to upcycle materials to help keep your community clean. I did only change the color, so I could change that to a bold font, or I could underline it or change the size or the font to set it apart in a way other than the color. As mentioned in Rice chapter 8, it's really important to give oral and written directions. I did do this for this project. I did go through the whole thing with them orally, and of course, the directions are written here as well. If I have hearing impaired students, I could add audio recordings in as well. And I also could, so down here, the students were to type into the text boxes. If there was an issue with typing into the text boxes, I could accept other types of written responses. I could accept a picture of written response with just a handwritten response. I could accept that, which I did not offer that option. I did tell them just to type into here. And I also could accept voice recorded responses if students are unable to type or write their responses. In table 8.5, this actually was very helpful. Rice explains that it's important to provide multiple means of expressing understanding. So I think that would be helpful for a project such as this to provide a checklist to promote independence and some guided questions for self-monitoring. So I think at the end of this, I could have added a checklist. Like, did you use recycled material? Did you watch the video? Did you answer all of the questions? And examples such as that, I think would be very helpful for the end of their project and for the end of any project that we do. So I definitely think I'm going to utilize that and start adding in some checklists and some guided questions. It was also mentioned in the Rice article that it's beneficial to create assignments with an authentic and purposeful outcome. I do feel that this assignment is a good example of that. It's giving students a unique opportunity to use materials and turn it into something new. So I do think that this provided an authentic experience for them. So the second assignment was a math Google Doc. So as you can see, this is what we did when they first started their online learning. So I think that my Google Docs have gotten much better since this time, and my assignments have gotten better since this time. I've moved toward using mostly Google Forms and using Google Slides. I don't utilize Google Documents quite as much as I did at first when I was still trying to figure everything out. So in the Online Accessibility Handbook, it did mention, as I mentioned in the last assignment as well, it's important to have headings that have a style to them. So it's important that I format them to say which heading it is. So here there's just like a bunch of text, and I know that I did not change the style of any of these. These are all, as we can see, just normal text. So it would be really beneficial to just add some headings in there so that it's not all jumbled together. As for the directions, I also didn't make them stand out an incredible amount. So I just changed the color, which if a student is colorblind or visually impaired, that may not be helpful for them. So I could make it really big. I could change the font or make it bolded. I did bold directions, but I can make the whole thing bolded or underlined. I could also just make it a new heading. When I watched the screen reader video demonstration and I listened to the way that the table was read, it was so overwhelming. The first time it was read, it was like all jumbled together, and I just never really thought about the importance of adding headings to your tables. But until I listened to that screen reader. So that was really helpful to understand how it would be read if it wasn't designated a certain format. So it's really important when I have a table that I do designate a certain format to it. Now this is actually just a picture of a table, so I would have to add the alt text explaining what is in this table. Also, so as we can see, some of these questions ask about just two portions. So I think instead of having just one picture where if somebody did have to rely on the alt text, they would have to listen to what the entire table is showing, I think it would be beneficial to have forests, wetlands, and grasslands all separated so that they only had to click on the ones that they were using at that time. I could also just crop the picture and, put it right next, put the two categories that they were using right next to it. So like for this one, I would just put the grasslands and the wetlands. That would also be beneficial for some students with special needs. Some students just need their work modified so that it doesn't get all jumbled, so that they don't have to look at a lot of information at once. So I think that modification would also help them because it wouldn't make the work any easier, but it would tell them what they need to focus on. Okay, you don't need to worry about the forest for this question, just focus on the grasslands and the wetlands. In addition to that, in Rice Chapter 8, it did mention that we should provide multiple means of representation. So now this document, I actually have a lot of questions, and it could be overwhelming to certain students with certain impairments and disabilities. In addition to that, I also have them stop and then they'll have to come back to the same document later for the next day, which I do not do anymore, but I did do that. So that I think should be chunked, which was mentioned in that table 8.5. If I chunk these sections rather than having them all on one document, it would be much less overwhelming and it would be much easier to be read. Depending on the student's impairment or disability, I could also delete some of these questions. Like there are an excessive amount of questions for the last one, and if I don't need them all and I only need the questions that are required for me to understand, to know whether they understand the content or not, I think I could just stop then. In the rights article table 8.4, it did say that for English language arts, a highlighter tool may be important to identify important information. I do think that it could be relevant for this as well, even though this is math. I could have highlighted keywords such as fewer or how many fewer, how many more. I think that just adding that highlighted, I think just adding the highlighter tool would be beneficial in helping the students find the correct answers, how many total, and things like that. All right, so thank you very much for listening to my analysis.